I never thought I'd be starting over at 53. My name is Laura Thompson, and until 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was a pretty decent life. I've been married for 30 years to Richard, the man I met in college and built my entire adult life with. We have 2 children, Emma, who's 28 and works as a marketing executive in Chicago, and Jason, our 25-year-old who just finished law school last year. I've always considered myself fortunate, not in a perfect life kind of way, but in that steady, comfortable way where you think you know exactly where you'll be in 5, 10, even 20 years. I gave up a promising career in architecture when we had Emma. It wasn't really a choice back then. Richard was just starting his financial consulting business, working 80-hour weeks, and someone had to be there for our daughter. When Jason came along 3 years later, it just made sense for me to stay home. I told myself it was temporary, just until the kids were in school. Then it became just until they were more independent. Before I knew it, 20 years had passed. Don't get me wrong. I don't regret being there for my children. But somewhere along the way, I put my own dreams on a shelf so high that I eventually stopped noticing them gathering dust. When the kids were teenagers, I started helping Richard with the business. What began as just keeping the books eventually turned into me managing client relationships, handling all our marketing and streamlining operations. I never took a salary. Why would I? We were building our future together, or so I thought. The company was registered under my name for tax purposes, something Richard's accountant suggested years ago that seemed inconsequential at the time. The first signs that something was wrong started about 2 years ago. Richard began working later than usual. His phone would constantly buzz with notifications that he'd quickly silence. He started going to the gym 5 times a week and bought an entirely new wardrobe. I almost laughed when he came home with skinny jeans and fitted shirts. This from a man who had worn nothing but relaxed fit khakis for 20 years. "You're having a midlife crisis," I joked one night as he checked himself in the mirror before a client dinner. He didn't laugh. Instead, he gave me this look I'd never seen before. Like I was an obstacle rather than a partner. "Maybe I just want to feel good about myself, Laura. Maybe I'm tired of letting myself go." The comment stung, but I brushed it off. I gained some weight over the years, sure. My hair had more gray than brown now, and I'd settled comfortably into a wardrobe of practical clothes that accommodated my busy life managing our home, business, and aging parents. But letting myself go? That phrase would return to haunt me later. For my birthday that year, Richard gave me a gift certificate for a complete makeover at an upscale salon. "I thought you might want to try something new," he said with that same strange look. I remember staring at the envelope, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. After 30 years together, was this what our relationship had come to? Subtle hints that I wasn't attractive enough anymore? Still, I went to the salon. I got the works, new haircut, color, makeup tutorial, the whole 9 yards. I even went shopping afterward and bought some new clothes that actually made me feel pretty. The woman in the mirror looked vibrant, confident. Someone I hadn't seen in years. When I came home, Richard barely looked up from his laptop. "Looks nice," he said absently, before asking if I'd sent the Patterson proposal. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the shower running to mask the sound. Something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to face what it might be. Instead, I threw myself into work, into being the perfect wife, into making everything so seamless that Richard would remember why we were good together. It was Emma who finally made me see what was happening. She came home for a weekend visit in February, and we were having coffee at the kitchen island while Richard was at the gym, again. "Mom," she said carefully, setting down her mug. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart started racing immediately. Emma had that serious look she'd had since childhood when she was working up the courage to say something difficult. "Are you and Dad okay? And please don't say fine because I'm not blind." I remember my hands trembling so badly that coffee sloshed over the rim of my cup. "What do you mean?" Emma took a deep breath. "Dad's acting weird. He's dressing differently, he's constantly on his phone. And when I called him last week about Jason's birthday plans, a woman answered his phone." The world tilted sideways. "What woman?" "She said she was his assistant." "But Dad doesn't have an assistant, does he?" "No, he didn't. We discussed hiring one many times, but Richard always said it wasn't in the budget, that I had everything under control." "Maybe it's someone new," I said weakly, but I knew. In that moment I knew. Mom! Emma reached across the counter and took my hands. Jason saw Dad last month in the city. He was at a restaurant with a woman. He was kissing her hand. I don't remember much of the rest of that conversation. I know Emma was worried that she kept apologizing for telling me, that she offered to stay longer. But all I could feel was this strange detached sensation, like I was floating above my body, watching my 30-year marriage dissolve in real time. I didn't confront Richard right away. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I snooped. That night, while he was sleeping, I checked his phone. It was password protected, which was new. When had he started locking his phone? But his laptop wasn't, and his email was open. There she was. Melissa. 28 years old, the same age as our daughter, and there were hundreds of emails between them. Some were professional about client meetings and proposals. Others were decidedly not. I read things that night that I can never unread. Promises my husband of 30 years had made to this girl. Complaints about his stifling life at home. About feeling trapped with a wife who didn't understand his ambition. There was one email that broke me completely. Richard had written, "Laura's a good woman and a great mother, but we've grown apart. I feel alive with you in a way I haven't in years. When I look at my future now, I see possibility again, not just routine until retirement." I wanted to scream, to wake him up and demand answers, to throw his laptop through our bedroom window. Instead, I carefully closed everything, returned the computer exactly as I'd found it, and slipped back into bed beside the stranger I'd spent my life with. For 2 weeks I said nothing. I watched him lie to my face every day, kissing me goodbye while texting her, coming home late with transparent excuses. I started documenting everything, taking screenshots of emails I found, noting his absences, collecting credit card statements showing dinners and hotel charges. Meanwhile, I contacted an attorney, a woman who'd been referred by my friend Diane, who'd gone through her own divorce 3 years prior. I learned about my rights, about what to expect. I started secretly copying financial records from the business, transferring small amounts from our joint accounts into a new account only in my name. The most painful part was pretending, serving Richard his favorite breakfast, asking about his day, sleeping beside him at night, turning away when he reached for me, claiming exhaustion or a headache. I chose a Tuesday to confront him. The kids were both coming for dinner on Saturday, and I wanted time to process whatever happened before seeing them. Richard came home around 7, later than he'd promised but earlier than I'd expected. "Sorry I'm late," he called out, dropping his keys in the bowl by the door. A bowl I'd made in a pottery class 10 years ago. Client meeting ran long. I was sitting at the dining room table, a glass of wine untouched in front of me. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but seeing him swagger in, loosening his tie with that practiced casualness, every prepared word evaporated. "How long have you been sleeping with Melissa?" The words came out calm, almost conversational. Richard froze. For a second, just a brief, telling second, panic flashed across his face before he composed himself. "What are you talking about?" He tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Who's Melissa?" "Your assistant. The one you never mentioned hiring. The one who's 28 years old. The one you took to the Langham Hotel last Tuesday for the night." He sank into the chair across from me, his face draining of color. "Laura, I can explain." "How long, Richard?" He stared at his hands. 8 months. 8 months. While I was planning our anniversary trip, while I was helping Emma through her breakup, while I was driving Richard's mother to chemotherapy appointments twice a week, he'd been building a secret life. "Do you love her?" I don't know why I asked. It didn't really matter. "It's complicated," he said, and I actually laughed. "No, Richard, it's actually quite simple. You're having an affair. With someone younger than our daughter. It's not just physical," he said defensively, as if that made it better. "She understands me. She's ambitious, driven. She challenges me. And I don't? After 30 years of supporting your career, raising your children, running your household, managing your business, I don't challenge you." He had the audacity to look annoyed. "That's not what I meant. We've just grown apart, Laura. You have to have noticed. We're like roommates now, not lovers. When was the last time you were interested in trying something new? When was the last time you weren't too tired?" The blame. That's what broke the dam. So this is my fault? You cheated because I'm tired after managing every aspect of our lives, while you get to be the big important businessman. See? This is exactly what I mean. You resent me, he said, as if he'd caught me in some kind of admission. I resent you now, I said, my voice shaking. I didn't before. Before I was proud of you. I supported you. I loved you. Richard ran a hand through his expensively cut hair. Laura, people change. We've both changed. I'm at a point in my life where I'm reevaluating what I want for my future. And what you want is a woman half your age. That's not fair. Melissa and I connect intellectually. She sees me for who I really am. I couldn't help but laugh again, bitter and harsh. Oh, Richard. She sees who you pretend to be. I'm the one who knows who you really are. This isn't productive, he said, standing up. I think we both need some time to cool down. We can talk about this rationally tomorrow. Sit down, I said so sharply that he actually did. I'm not finished. I want to know what your plan was. Were you going to leave me? Or just keep cheating indefinitely? He looked away, and in that moment I knew. You were waiting for the kids to be more settled, I guessed. Maybe another year or two. Then you'd break the news that we'd grown apart and ride off into the sunset with your child bride. She's 28, not a child, he snapped. And yes, I was trying to find the right time. I didn't want to hurt you. How considerate, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. And what about the business? Our house? The life we've built? Richard waved his hand dismissively. We divide everything fairly, of course. I'd make sure you were taken care of. Taken care of, I repeated, the words tasting like poison. Like a dependent. Like someone who hasn't contributed equally to everything we have. Laura, be reasonable. I'm the one who built the business. Yes, you helped and I appreciate that, but I helped. I cut him off. I helped? I ran that business while you played golf with clients and took 3-hour lunches. I'm the one who computerized our systems when you insisted on keeping paper records. I'm the one who brought in the Westridge account that doubled our business 5 years ago. Don't exaggerate, he said coldly. You did the clerical work. I'm the one with the expertise, the client relationships, the vision. I stood up then, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Get out. Richard blinked. What? Get out of this house. Now, pack a bag and leave. He scoffed. You can't just kick me out of my own home. Watch me. I pulled out my phone. I can either call Emma and Jason right now and tell them everything, including those emails where you called our family life stifling, or you can leave quietly and we can figure out how to tell them together. You're being hysterical, he said, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. Richard had always cared deeply about his image, especially in the eyes of our children. One more word like that and I'm calling them. And then I'm calling your mother. Should I continue down the list? Your sister? Your golf buddies? The Pattersons who just signed that big contract with us. You wouldn't dare, he hissed. Try me, I said, my finger hovering over Emma's name in my contacts. I have nothing left to lose. He left within the hour, taking a suitcase and his precious collection of designer watches. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor in our entryway in our home, and finally allowed myself to cry. For 3 days I barely functioned. I called in sick to the office, ignoring Richard's increasingly frustrated texts about client matters that needed attention. I told the kids we were taking some space to work through some issues, which wasn't a lie but wasn't the full truth either. I wanted to be more emotionally stable before having that conversation. On the 4th day, I forced myself to shower, to put on real clothes, to eat something more substantial than crackers and wine. Then I called my attorney. He'll try to hide assets, she warned me. Men like him always do. Let him try, I said, a new resolve hardening within me. But there's something you should know. The business is in my name. There was a pause on the line. Completely in your name? He has no legal ownership. None. It was for tax purposes when we started it. He always meant to create a formal partnership, but we never got around to it. My attorney's laugh was pure satisfaction. Mrs. Thompson, that changes everything. I went into the office the next day. Richard was there, looking haggard but defiant. And there she was, Melissa, sitting at a desk near his office. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Long chestnut hair, perfect skin, a slim figure in an expensive-looking dress. She glanced up when I walked in, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. Laura. Richard stepped out of his office, clearly startled to see me. I didn't expect you today. Clearly, I said, looking pointedly at Melissa. We need to talk. In private. In his office, I closed the door and sat down across from his desk, just as I had hundreds of times before when we were discussing business matters. I've consulted an attorney, I said without preamble. He nodded stiffly. I assumed you would. I've done the same. Good. Then we can discuss this reasonably. I crossed my legs, straightened my shoulders. I want a divorce. I think that's for the best, he agreed, looking relieved that I wasn't creating a scene. I'll be keeping the business, I continued. He laughed, sharp and dismissive. Don't be ridiculous. We'll divide all assets equally. That's the law. The business is legally mine, Richard. Check the paperwork. The color drained from his face. That was just a tax arrangement. It's a legal arrangement, I corrected him. The company is registered solely in my name. I am the owner. You are an employee. No judge would uphold that. His voice rose. I started this company. It's my expertise, my client list. Your client list? I smiled thinly. You mean the clients I've been managing for years? The ones who call me directly with their questions and concerns? Those clients. This is absurd. You're trying to steal my life's work. No, Richard. I'm claiming what's already mine. What always has been mine. The difference is now I know my worth. He stood up, looming over the desk. You will regret this, Laura. I'll fight you every step of the way. You think the courts will side with a housewife who occasionally helped with paperwork over the financial expert who built a 7-figure business. I didn't flinch. I think the courts will side with the legal owner who has documentation of every account, every client interaction, and every business decision for the past 15 years. I think they'll be very interested in the company credit card you've been using to wine and dine your girlfriend. His face contorted with rage. You vindictive bitch. This is why I couldn't stand being married to you anymore. Always keeping score. Always martyring yourself. I stood up too, gathering my purse. You know what your problem is, Richard? You convinced yourself that I needed you more than you needed me. You were wrong. As I turned to leave, he called after me. What about Melissa? You're just going to fire her out of spite. I paused at the door. Actually, I'd like to speak with her before I make any decisions. I found Melissa at her desk, pretending to work but clearly having heard at least some of our heated exchange. The office wasn't that large, and Richard had never been good at controlling his volume when angry. Melissa, could I speak with you for a moment? In the conference room. She glanced nervously toward Richard's office, then nodded and followed me. She sat across from me at the long table, perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly together. I assume you know who I am, I began. Yes, Mrs. Thompson. Her voice was softer than I'd expected, nervous. How long have you been working here, Melissa? 6 months. 2 months after the affair started, then. I wondered if he'd created the position just for her. And what exactly are your responsibilities? She swallowed visibly. I assist Mr. Thompson with client correspondence, scheduling, presentation preparation, general administrative duties. I see. I studied her face. She couldn't hold my gaze for more than a few seconds at a time. And how long have you been sleeping with my husband? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Mrs. Thompson, I'm not asking for an apology or an explanation. I cut her off. I'm simply establishing facts. Richard already confirmed the affair. Her shoulders slumped slightly. 8 months, she admitted. Did he tell you we were separated? Having problems? That it was essentially over between us? A tear slipped down her cheek. He said you had an arrangement, that you lived separate lives and stayed together for appearances. I nodded, not surprised. And did you believe that? Even when he never took you to our home? Never introduced you to our children? Never appeared with you in public where we might have mutual acquaintances? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. I'm not going to vilify you, Melissa. I said, softening my tone slightly. You're not the first young woman to be manipulated by a married man, and sadly, you won't be the last. But I do have a question for you. What exactly do you see in a man who would lie so elaborately to his wife of 30 years? He's not like that with me, she said defensively. He's kind, attentive, supportive of my goals. He was all those things with me too once. I smiled sadly. The problem with men like Richard is that they're always looking for something newer. Something that makes them feel young and vital again. Right now, that's you. But what happens when you hit 40? When your body changes, when you're tired from raising children or managing a household? What happens when someone younger comes along? She looked stricken, and I almost felt sorry for her. I'm not firing you today, I said, standing up. But I will be restructuring the company in the coming weeks. If you want to continue working here, it will be in a proper administrative role with appropriate boundaries and expectations. If that doesn't interest you, I understand, and I'll provide a reference for your time here. As I walked toward the door, she called after me. He does love you, you know. He talks about you all the time. I turned back. That's the saddest part of all this, Melissa. I know he does, in his way. Just not enough to be honest. Not enough to be faithful. Not enough to see what was right in front of him all along. I left the office after that, ignoring Richard's attempts to continue our conversation. I needed space, time to think and plan. The confrontation had drained me, but there was also something exhilarating about finally speaking my truth, about standing up for myself after decades of compromise. That night, alone in my bedroom, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. Really looked for the first time in years. The lines around my eyes and mouth, the silver threading through my hair, the softness around my middle that hadn't been there in my 20s. But I also saw strength in my posture, wisdom in my gaze, capability in my hands that had held our family together through crises and celebrations alike. You are enough, I told my reflection. You have always been enough. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning I woke to a barrage of texts from Richard, alternating between angry threats and desperate pleas. I ignored them all and called Emma. Mom? Is everything okay? Her voice was immediately concerned. I need to tell you and Jason something important, I said. Can you both come over tonight? Dad won't be there? No. Your father and I are separating. I'd rather explain everything in person. There was a pause. Oh, Mom. I'm so sorry. But I'm not entirely surprised. I know, sweetheart. Neither am I, looking back. But there's more to it than you know. Telling my children that their father had been unfaithful was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I tried to be factual, to avoid vilifying Richard despite my anger. They deserved to know the truth, but they also deserved to preserve their own relationships with their father. Jason was furious. I'll kill him, he said, pacing the living room. How could he do this to you? To our family? Emma was quieter, tears streaming down her face. I knew something was wrong, but I never thought he'd. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have said something sooner. This isn't your fault, I assured them both. It's not your responsibility to manage your parents' marriage. But there's something else you should know. I explained about the business, about the legal ownership, about my plans to take control of what was rightfully mine. Dad's going to lose it, Jason said, a hint of admiration in his voice. He's so proud of that business. He should be, I agreed. We built something successful together. I just won't allow him to pretend I was a minor character in that story anymore. Emma reached for my hand. What can we do to help? Just be patient with me, I said. This isn't going to be easy or clean. Your father won't go quietly, and there will probably be ugly moments ahead. I don't want to put you in the middle, but I also won't lie to protect his ego. They both promised their support, though I could see the pain in their eyes. No matter how justified, the disintegration of their parents' marriage would leave scars. After they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, looking out at the garden I'd planted and tended for 20 years. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and financial discussions and difficult decisions. But tonight, in this moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the marriage I thought I had, for the life I'd planned, for the partner I'd lost long before I realized he was gone. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, tearful conversations, and sleepless nights. Richard hired an aggressive attorney who tried to argue that regardless of legal ownership, the business was a marital asset that should be divided equally. My attorney countered with documentation of all the unpaid labor I'd contributed to both the business and our household over 30 years. Richard tried another approach, claiming that I was emotionally unstable, that I was vindicatively trying to destroy him out of jealousy. He even suggested I'd known about and tacitly approved of his relationship with Melissa. Let him make those claims, my attorney said confidently. The more desperate he sounds, the better for us. Meanwhile, I went into the office every day, learning aspects of the business that Richard had always handled, introducing myself to clients I'd only known through email, and slowly, methodically making the company truly mine. Some clients left, uncomfortable with the transition or loyal to Richard. But most stayed, many expressing admiration for how I was handling a difficult situation. Melissa quit after 2 weeks. I wasn't surprised. The fantasy had crumbled, and without the excitement of forbidden romance, she was left with the reality of a middle-aged man in the midst of a messy divorce. The most unexpected moment came 6 weeks after our initial confrontation. I was working late at the office when Richard appeared in my doorway. He looked different, older somehow, the confident swagger replaced by a slumped posture I'd never associated with him. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What about?" He sat heavily, rubbing his face with one hand. "I've been staying at the Marriott." "I know. You've been charging it to the company card. We'll need to discuss that." He winced. "I didn't have anywhere else to go. Melissa." That ended. I assumed it would. I kept my tone neutral, professional. "Laura, I made a terrible mistake. The biggest mistake of my life." His voice cracked slightly. "I threw away 30 years for nothing." Part of me, a small hurt part, wanted to savor this moment, to watch him grovel and beg. But mostly I just felt tired. Sad for what we'd lost. Angry at the waste of it all. "What do you want, Richard? Forgiveness? Reconciliation? Or just a place to stay that isn't costing you $200 a night?" "I want my life back," he said simply. "I want us back." I studied him across the desk that had once been his. "The problem is, I don't want that life back. That life was built on me compromising, me accommodating, me shrinking myself to fit your expectations. It doesn't have to be that way. We could start over, rebuild differently." I shook my head. "You don't get it. I like who I am now. I like running this company on my own terms. I like making decisions without checking with you first. I like sleeping in the middle of the bed." "You're punishing me," he said, bitterness creeping into his tone. "No, Richard. I'm choosing me. Maybe for the first time in 30 years. He left without another word, and I let myself cry afterward. Not for him, but for the 3 decades it had taken me to understand my own value. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. In the end, Richard accepted a settlement far less than what he'd initially demanded. I kept the business and the house. He got a generous cash payout and his precious car collection. I insisted on a clause preventing him from starting a competing firm for at least 2 years. Not out of spite, but practical business sense. When we met to sign the final papers, Richard looked defeated. The designer clothes hung loosely on his frame, and the arrogance I'd grown accustomed to had been replaced by resignation. "You won," he said as we walked out of the attorney's office. "This wasn't a competition, Richard." "Then what was it?" I considered the question carefully. "A reckoning. A long overdue balancing of accounts." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for Melissa, but for not seeing you. Really seeing what you contributed, what you sacrificed." "I know you are," I said, and meant it. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Richard. I really do." I watched him walk to his car, the sleek BMW he'd insisted on buying during the early days of his midlife crisis, and felt a curious lightness. Not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Possibility, perhaps. The same possibility he'd claimed to find with Melissa, but real this time. Earned. Mine. 6 months have passed since that day. The business continues to thrive. We've even expanded into a new market segment that Richard had always dismissed as too risky. I've reconnected with old friends, taken up pottery again, even gone on a few dates, though nothing serious yet. Emma and Jason visit often. Their relationship with their father is strained but healing gradually. I encourage them to give him time, to remember the good father he was even if he was a flawed husband. Last week, I ran into Melissa at a coffee shop downtown. There was an awkward moment of recognition before she approached my table hesitantly. "Mrs. Thompson," she began. "Laura, please." She nodded, twisting her hands nervously. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything." "I appreciate that," I said sincerely. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay. Working at Meridian Financial now. And I'm seeing someone. Someone single." She offered a small smile. "I'm glad to hear it." She hesitated, then asked, "Can I ask you something? How did you do it? How did you stay so strong through everything?" I considered the question. I wasn't always strong. I cried more in those 6 months than I had in the previous 10 years combined. But I realized something important. The worst had already happened. My marriage was over. The life I'd planned was gone. So what was left to fear? "That makes sense," she said thoughtfully. "Besides," I added, "at 53, you realize time is too precious to waste on people who don't value you." She nodded, looking thoughtful. "Thank you. For being kind when you didn't have to be." As she walked away, I thought about how much had changed in a year. How I'd gone from a woman desperately trying to hold together a crumbling marriage to someone forging a new path entirely my own. There were still hard days, still moments when I missed the security of partnership, the comfort of shared history. But those moments were growing fewer and farther between. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the house that's now truly mine, I look at the spaces where Richard's things once were. Spaces I've gradually filled with items that reflect only my taste, my preferences. Sometimes I feel a pang of loss for the 30 years we shared. The good times that were real despite how it ended. But more often I feel a quiet pride. Pride in my resilience, in my business acumen, in my capacity for reinvention at an age when many people are settling into comfortable routines. I never wanted my marriage to end. I never planned to be starting over in my 50s. But now that I am, I'm discovering that there's something profoundly liberating about building a life that doesn't revolve around accommodating someone else's dreams, someone else's ego, someone else's definition of value. Richard thought I was too old, too settled, too familiar to be exciting anymore. He threw away 3 decades for a fantasy that collapsed within months. What he never understood, what I myself only recently grasped, is that a woman who knows her worth is ageless. A woman who finally stops shrinking herself to make others comfortable is limitless. Yesterday, Emma called just to check in. "How are you doing, Mom?" "Really doing?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. "I'm good, sweetheart. Better than good, actually. I'm free." And for the first time in as long as I can remember, that wasn't just something I was saying to avoid worry or questions. It was simply and profoundly the truth. Part 2. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting across from Thomas Erickson, the CEO of Westridge Capital, one of our biggest clients. We were having lunch at an upscale restaurant downtown, discussing their upcoming portfolio restructuring, the kind of meeting Richard would have handled exclusively in the past. "I have to say, Laura," Thomas said, swirling his wine thoughtfully, "when we first heard about the changes at Thompson Financial, we had concerns. But your team hasn't missed a beat. In fact, I think your analysis on the Anderson acquisition was more thorough than anything we've seen before." I smiled, allowing myself to fully embrace the compliment. "Thank you. I've been handling most of our major accounts personally during the transition." "Richard was lucky to have you," he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, that was insensitive." "Not at all," I assured him. "Richard and I built the business together, even if he was the public face for many years. I'm just more visible now." Thomas nodded, clearly relieved we could speak frankly. "If you don't mind my asking, how is he doing? We heard he's starting something new." "He is," I confirmed, keeping my expression neutral. "A boutique consulting firm focusing on early-stage startups. I wish him well." This was true, surprisingly. The bitterness that had consumed me during those early months had gradually softened into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of detached compassion. Richard had made his choices and was living with the consequences, just as I was living with mine. What Thomas didn't know, what few people knew, was that Richard's new venture was struggling. Emma had mentioned it during our weekly Sunday call, concern evident in her voice despite her lingering anger toward her father. "He looks terrible, Mom," she'd confided. "The apartment is barely furnished, and he was wearing the same shirt I saw him in 2 weeks ago." "That's not your burden to carry," I told her gently. "Your father is a grown man with resources. He'll figure it out." But privately, I found myself feeling an unexpected twinge of empathy. Not enough to reach out or offer help. Our boundaries were necessary and hard-won, but enough to hope he would eventually find his footing. After lunch with Thomas, I walked back to the office, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the simple pleasure of having nowhere else to be. No one waiting for me to rush home and prepare dinner or manage a household crisis. This was one of the unexpected gifts of my new lifetime that was truly my own. The office had changed significantly over the past year. I'd redecorated, replacing the dark, masculine furniture Richard had preferred with cleaner lines and brighter colors. The staff had changed too. Some had left with Richard, loyal to him or uncomfortable with the transition. Others had stayed, and I'd hired several new team members, including Diane, my friend who'd gone through her own divorce years earlier, and who now headed our client services department. "How was lunch with Westridge?" Diane asked as I passed her office. "Productive. They're increasing their portfolio with us next quarter." She grinned. "Told you. They weren't staying for Richard. They were staying for the quality of work, which was mostly you anyway." I laughed, still unused to taking full credit for my contributions. "Maybe so. But speaking of quality work, how's the Henderson presentation coming along?" "Almost finished. Want to review it before tomorrow's meeting." We spent the next hour fine-tuning the presentation, a comfortable rhythm we'd developed over months of working together. This was another change I'd implemented, a more collaborative approach than Richard's top-down management style. The results spoke for themselves in improved team morale and client satisfaction. By 6 o'clock, the office had emptied out. I stayed late, as I often did, not from obligation but from a genuine enjoyment of the quiet productivity of evening hours. As I was shutting down my computer, my phone rang, Jason's number flashing on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," I answered, smiling at the sound of my son's voice. Since the divorce, Jason had become more attentive, calling several times a week instead of the occasional check-ins of the past. "Mom, are you still at the office? I'm downtown. Thought maybe we could grab dinner if you're free." 20 minutes later, we were seated at a casual Italian place a few blocks from my office. Jason looked good, law firm life suited him, even if the hours were punishing. He'd recently moved in with his girlfriend Sophia, a pediatric resident he'd met during his final year of law school. "So," he said after we'd ordered, "I have some news." My heart skipped a beat, the maternal instinct to both hope for and fear big announcements. "Oh." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm asking Sophia to marry me this weekend. Wanted to get your thoughts on the ring." Inside was a beautiful emerald-cut diamond in a simple platinum setting. "It's perfect," I said, feeling tears well up. "She'll love it. Dad helped me pick it out," he said carefully, watching my reaction. "I went to see him last week." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's wonderful, Jason. I'm glad you included him." And I meant it. Despite everything, Richard was still their father. I never wanted my children to feel they had to choose sides or hide their relationship with him from me. "He asked about you," Jason continued, returning the ring to his pocket. "Said he heard the business is doing well." "It is," I confirmed. "And how is he?" "Really?" Jason sighed. "Struggling, I think. Not just financially, though I gather that's part of it. He seems lost. Said something about how he never realized how much of the business was actually you, until he tried to do it without you." I nodded, unsurprised. Richard had always been good at the big picture, the charismatic client-facing role. But the operational details, the follow-through, the consistent excellence in execution, those had been my domain. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "But he's resilient. He'll adapt." "That's what I told him," Jason agreed, then hesitated. "He also mentioned he's not seeing anyone." Said he learned his lesson about chasing youth. I couldn't help but laugh. Well, at least something good came from all this. Mom. Jason's expression grew serious. Are you dating anyone? It's been over a year since the divorce, and I worry about you being alone. The question didn't surprise me. Both my children had been gently probing about my social life for months. I've been on a few dates, I admitted. Nothing serious. What I didn't add was that I wasn't sure I wanted anything serious. After 3 decades defined by my role as wife and mother, there was something exhilarating about answering only to myself, about making decisions based solely on my own desires and needs. You deserve to be happy, Jason insisted. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are. I smiled at my son, this wonderful man we'd raised who could still surprise me with his insight and compassion. I am happy, Jason. Truly. My life is full, the business, my friends, you and Emma, that pottery class I've been taking. I'm not closing the door on romance, but I'm not chasing it either. After dinner, Jason walked me to my car. As we hugged goodbye, he held on a little longer than usual. I'm proud of you, Mom, he whispered. For everything, how you handled the divorce, how you've rebuilt your life. Dad messed up big time and he knows it. Those words stayed with me during the drive home, a warm counterbalance to the chill autumn air. The next morning brought an unexpected email from Richard. The subject line was simple. Congratulations. Laura, I heard from Thomas Erickson that Westridge is expanding their portfolio with Thompson Financial. I wanted to say congratulations. That's a significant achievement, especially given the market conditions this quarter. I know we don't communicate much these days, and that's appropriate given everything. But I wanted you to know that I'm genuinely happy for your success. The company is thriving under your leadership, which is no surprise to me now that I've tried to replicate even a fraction of what you did behind the scenes all those years. Jason mentioned he told you about my new venture. It's been humbling to say the least. Turns out I'm much better at the front of house role than building something from scratch on my own. Another realization that came too late. Anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge your success. You earned it. Richard. I read the email twice, unsure how to feel. There was no request hidden in the words, no manipulative undercurrent I could detect. Just a simple acknowledgement from a man finally confronting the reality of what he'd thrown away. I decided to respond with equal simplicity. Richard, thank you for the kind words. I hope your new venture finds its footing soon. Laura. Short, professional, neither cold nor overly familiar. It felt like the right tone for whatever this new phase of our relationship might be. Two people who had once been everything to each other, now navigating a limited but civil connection primarily for the sake of our children. That weekend, Emma came to visit. At 30, she was thriving in her marketing career, recently promoted to director level at her firm in Chicago. We were sitting in my newly renovated kitchen. I'd finally replaced the dark granite countertops Richard had insisted on with a lighter, brighter quartz. Drinking wine and catching up. Jason told me about the proposal plans, she said, eyes bright with excitement. Sophia's perfect for him. She is, I agreed. I'm so happy they found each other. Emma swirled her wine thoughtfully. It's made me think about relationships differently, watching what happened with you and Dad. I used to think finding the one and getting married was the ultimate goal, you know? Now I'm more focused on finding someone who sees me clearly and values what I bring to the table. That's a much healthier approach than mine was, I admitted. I was so young when I met your father, just 20. I didn't know who I was yet, so I let myself become whoever he needed me to be. But you found yourself eventually, Emma pointed out. Look at you now, running a successful company, renovating the house exactly how you want it, taking pottery classes, going on dates with interesting men. I laughed. Who said they were interesting? Oh, come on, she teased. That Silver Fox professor you mentioned last month sounded pretty fascinating. She wasn't wrong. David was interesting. A history professor at the local university, widowed 5 years earlier, with a dry wit and kind eyes. We'd had 3 lovely dinners and one somewhat awkward but sweet goodnight kiss. I wasn't sure where it was heading, if anywhere, but I enjoyed his company. David is nice, I conceded. But I'm not in any rush. For the first time in my adult life, I'm getting to know myself without defining myself in relation to someone else. It's liberating. Emma nodded, understanding in her eyes. I get that. But don't close yourself off to possibilities just because of what happened with Dad. I won't, I promised. Speaking of your father, have you seen him recently? Her expression clouded slightly. Last month. We had lunch. He seemed different. More reflective, I guess. Less of that bravado he always had. Jason mentioned something similar, I said carefully. He asked about you, Emma added. Wanted to know if you were seeing anyone serious. I raised an eyebrow. And what did you tell him? The truth, that you're dating casually but focusing on rebuilding your life on your own terms. She hesitated. I think he regrets everything, Mom. Not just getting caught or losing the business, but really deeply regrets throwing away what you had together. Probably, I agreed. But regret isn't the same as genuine change. And even if he has changed, some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. Emma studied me over the rim of her wineglass. Are you still angry with him? I considered the question carefully. Not angry exactly. Disappointed. Sad for what might have been. But mostly I've moved beyond it. His choices set me on a path I might never have found otherwise, and for that, I'm actually grateful in a strange way. That night, after Emma had gone to bed in her old room, I sat on the back porch with a final glass of wine, looking up at the stars. The garden was different now. I'd replaced Richard's meticulously trimmed hedges with more natural, flowing plantings that required less maintenance and brought me more joy. A metaphor for my life, perhaps. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Asterisk just finished grading papers. Any chance you're still awake and want to chat? Asterisk. I smiled and called him, speaking softly to avoid waking Emma. We talked for nearly an hour about everything and nothing. His students' creative interpretations of Civil War battles, my latest pottery project, a documentary we'd both recently watched. Easy conversation with no pressure, no expectations. When we finally said goodnight, I felt a warm contentment that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with connection. Whether David became someone significant in my life, or simply a pleasant chapter in my post-divorce story remained to be seen. But the simple fact that I could enjoy male company without defining myself by it felt like progress. The following Tuesday brought another unexpected development. I was in a meeting with our accounting team when my assistant knocked tentatively on the conference room door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Did she give a name? I asked, already mentally reviewing my calendar for the day. Melissa Taylor. The room went silent. Everyone knew the story, of course. It was impossible to keep secrets in an office this size, and the dramatic restructuring had required some level of explanation. Give me 5 minutes to finish up here, then send her to my office, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the surprise. As the meeting concluded and my team filed out, Diane lingered behind. Want me to sit in? She asked quietly. Or hover nearby with an urgent call ready to extract you? I smiled at her protectiveness. I'll be fine. But maybe check on me in 15 minutes. Melissa looked different than she had a year ago. Her hair was shorter, her clothing more professional than trendy. She stood as I entered my office, nervousness evident in her posture. Mrs. Thompson, Laura, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Of course, I said, gesturing for her to sit. What can I do for you? She took a deep breath. I'm applying for an MBA program and I need a letter of recommendation from a former employer. My current supervisor hasn't been with the company long enough, and before that, I worked here. I blinked, momentarily speechless. Of all the reasons I might have imagined for her visit, this hadn't crossed my mind. You want me to write you a recommendation letter? She nodded, a flush creeping up her neck. I know it's an unusual request, given everything, but you were technically my employer for those weeks after everything happened, and I've heard you're fair, even to people who have wronged you. Who told you that? I asked, genuinely curious. Richard, actually. She looked down at her hands. We've stayed in touch occasionally. As friends, she added quickly. Nothing more. I leaned back in my chair, considering her request. The old Laura might have said yes immediately, eager to please, to be seen as magnanimous, to avoid conflict. But I'd learned to take my time with decisions, to weigh them against my own values and boundaries. Why an MBA? I asked instead of answering directly. She looked surprised by the question. I want to understand business fundamentally, not just execute someone else's vision. The past year has been enlightening. I realized I was defining my worth through men's approval, rather than building something of my own. The irony wasn't lost on me, that my husband's affair partner had experienced her own awakening parallel to mine. And what will you do with this degree? Financial advising for women, she said, with unexpected conviction. Especially women going through major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes. Most financial advisors are men who don't understand the unique challenges women face. I couldn't help but laugh, though not unkindly. And you believe you understand those challenges? She had the grace to look embarrassed. Better than I did a year ago. And I'm learning. That's why I want this degree. To back up my experience with expertise. I studied her for a moment longer. There was a sincerity in her eyes that hadn't been there during our previous encounters. A steadiness that spoke of hard-won growth. I'll write the letter, I decided. Not because I approve of your past choices, but because I believe in second chances and new beginnings. Send me your application details and a draft of what you'd like me to address specifically. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. You don't, I agreed. But sometimes we receive grace we haven't earned. The trick is to pay it forward rather than take it for granted. After she left, Diane appeared in my doorway right on schedule. Everything okay? That was Richard's. Yes, I nodded. She wanted a recommendation letter for an MBA program. Diane's eyebrows shot up. And you're going to write it? I am. You're a better woman than me, she muttered. Not better, I corrected. Just at a different place in my journey. That evening, I received another email from Richard. Laura, Melissa mentioned she came to see you today. Thank you for agreeing to write the letter. She's changed a lot in the past year, we both have, though I had much further to go. I know this might be overstepping, but I've been thinking about our anniversary next month. Not to celebrate it, obviously, but because it makes me reflective. 32 years ago, we stood in your parents' backyard and promised each other forever. I broke that promise in the worst possible way, and I live with that knowledge every day. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm certainly not suggesting reconciliation. But I would appreciate the opportunity to apologize to you properly face to face if you're willing. No agenda beyond that, just a chance to say the things I should have said a year ago, before lawyers and anger and hurt made real conversation impossible. If this request makes you uncomfortable in any way, please ignore it. The last thing I want is to disrupt the life you've built. Richard. My thumb hovered over the delete button. The old Laura would have jumped at this chance, eager for closure, for validation, for Richard's approval even after everything. But I wasn't that Laura anymore. I set the phone aside without responding and went to my pottery class, losing myself in the therapeutic rhythm of the wheel. The cool clay beneath my fingers, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and wholly mine. 2 days later, after careful consideration, I replied, Richard, I appreciate your request and the thought behind it. I'm open to meeting for coffee next Thursday afternoon if that works for you. My office at 3 o'clock. Laura. Short, direct, on my terms. And in my territory, the office that had once been his domain but was now unquestionably mine. When Thursday arrived, I found myself oddly calm. Richard had once been the center of my universe, the sun around which my entire life orbited. Now he was just a man, flawed, aging human, coming to speak with me in a space where my confidence and competence were on full display. He arrived precisely at 3, dressed in a suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. He'd lost weight, and there was more gray at his temples than I remembered. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he said formally as my assistant showed him in. Of course. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Would you like coffee? Water. Water would be fine, thank you. The polite dance of former intimates, now nearly strangers. After my assistant brought water for both of us and closed the door behind her, Richard looked around the office, taking in the changes, the removal of all traces of his tenure. You've done well with the place, he said finally. The business too, from what I hear. Westridge renewed their contract. They did, I confirmed. and expanded their portfolio. He nodded, a rueful smile playing at his lips. I underestimated you. 4 years I convinced myself that I was the business mind, the visionary, and you were the support system. I was wrong. Yes, you were, I agreed simply. No anger in the words, just acknowledgement of truth. Richard took a deep breath. Laura, I owe you an apology. Not just for the affair, though obviously that was unforgivable, but for the decades before that. For taking you for granted. For not seeing your value, professionally and personally. For making you feel that you needed to shrink yourself to accommodate my ego. I listened without interrupting, studying the face I'd once known better than my own. There was genuine regret there, but also something else. A clarity that had been absent in the man I'd been married to. I've had a lot of time to think this past year, he continued. About who I was as a husband, as a man. About why I felt the need to seek validation from a younger woman, rather than cherish the partner who'd stood beside me for 3 decades. It wasn't about you being too old or us growing apart. Those were excuses. It was about my own insecurities, my fear of aging, my inability to find meaning beyond external validation. That's insightful, I said carefully. Have you been talking to someone? He nodded. A therapist. Jason's suggestion, actually. I've been going twice a week for 6 months now. That explained the change in him. Not just the physical differences but the self-awareness that had been sorely lacking before. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. It seems to be helping. It is. He fiddled with his water glass. I've learned a lot about myself. None of it particularly flattering but necessary. Growth rarely is flattering, I observed. But it's worthwhile. Yes. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. Laura, I'm not here to try to win you back. I know that bridge is burned, and rightly so. But I want you to know that losing you, losing our life together, has been the greatest regret of my life. And seeing you thrive despite what I did. It's both painful and deeply right. I felt an unexpected lump in my throat. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. He hesitated, then added, Jason told me you've been dating. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the change in topic. Casually. Richard nodded. Good. You deserve happiness, Laura. Real happiness, with someone who sees you clearly from the start. There was sadness in his voice, but no possession, no attempt to reassert the claim he'd abandoned. Progress of a sort. And you? I asked. Are you seeing anyone? He shook his head. No. I'm focusing on rebuilding my relationship with Emma and Jason, on my therapy, on trying to get this new business off the ground. Dating seems inappropriate somehow, like I haven't earned the right yet. That's between you and your therapist, I said, not unkindly. But our children love you, Richard. They're hurt and disappointed, but they want you in their lives. Don't let shame keep you from being the father they deserve. I'm trying, he promised. And speaking of our children, Jason told me about his engagement plans. Have you heard yet if she said yes? I smiled, grateful for the shift to safer, happier territory. She did. They called me Sunday night, both crying with happiness. The wedding will be next spring. That's wonderful news. His smile was genuine. They're good together. She grounds him. She does, I agreed. Like I once did for you. The words weren't meant to wound, just to acknowledge the parallel, but Richard winced slightly nonetheless. Yes. Before I took that for granted. We talked for a while longer, about Jason and Sophia's plans, about Emma's promotion, about mutual acquaintances from our shared past. Not quite the easy conversation of friends, but not the strained civility of recent enemies either. Something in between, something new. As our meeting drew to its natural conclusion, Richard stood to leave. Thank you for this, Laura. For hearing me out. Thank you for the apology, I responded. It means something, even now. He paused at the door. Can I ask you something? Are you happy? Truly happy, not just managing or surviving, but actually happy with your life now? I considered the question seriously, giving it the weight it deserved. I am, I said finally. Not every moment of every day, that's not realistic. But overall? Yes. I've discovered parts of myself I never knew existed. I've built a life that reflects who I am rather than who someone else needs me to be. There's a freedom in that I never expected. He nodded slowly. You're remarkable, Laura Thompson. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate that when I had the chance. After he left, I sat quietly in my office, processing the conversation. There was a time when Richard's validation would have been everything to me, when his approval would have determined my emotional state for days or weeks. Now, while I appreciated the sincerity of his apology, my sense of self remained unchanged by it. That, perhaps, was the greatest measure of how far I'd come. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Asterisk still on for dinner tonight? Found a new Thai place that's supposed to be amazing. Asterisk. I smiled and typed back. Asterisk absolutely. Looking forward to it. Asterisk. Life continued its forward motion. 2 months later, at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital, I found myself seated at the same table as Richard. Our first social encounter since the divorce. It was awkward initially, but we managed to navigate the evening with reasonable grace, united in our generous donation to the cause and our carefully maintained distance from each other. You look beautiful tonight, he said at one point, as we stood at the bar waiting for our drinks. That color suits you. Thank you, I replied, smoothing the deep teal fabric of my dress, a color Richard had always claimed washed me out during our marriage, but that David had once casually mentioned brought out the green in my eyes. Are you here with someone? He asked, glancing around. David Parker, I said, nodding toward where David was engaged in animated conversation with one of the hospital board members. He's a history professor at Westlake University. We've been seeing each other for a few months now. Richard followed my gaze. He seems nice. He is, I confirmed. Very different from you, actually. A rueful smile played at Richard's lips. That's probably a good thing. As if sensing our conversation, David looked over and excused himself from his discussion, making his way toward us. You must be Richard, he said warmly, extending his hand. I've heard a lot about you. Likewise, Richard lied politely, shaking the offered hand. Laura speaks highly of you. The two men chatted briefly about the event, about David's academic work, about Jason and Sophia's upcoming wedding. There was no tension, no territorial posturing, just two adults acknowledging their connections to me in very different capacities. When Richard excused himself a few minutes later, David turned to me with a gentle smile. You okay? I nodded, surprisingly at peace. I am. It's strange, but not in a bad way. He still loves you, David observed quietly. It's written all over his face when he looks at you. Maybe, I conceded. But not in a way that matters anymore. Later that night, as David and I walked to his car under a clear star-filled sky, he took my hand. You know, most women would find it intimidating. Dating someone with 30 years of history with another man. Is that what we're doing? I asked, half teasing. Dating. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious but gentle. I'd like to think so. I enjoy your company, Laura. I admire your strength, your resilience, your capacity for joy despite everything you've been through. I'd like to see where this goes if you're open to that. I studied his face in the soft glow of the streetlights, the laugh lines around his kind eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair, the patient expectation in his gaze. Here was a man who had seen me only as I am now, confident, self-sufficient, whole, not as the accommodating shadow of myself I'd been during my marriage. I'd like that too, I said finally, reaching up to touch his cheek. But slowly. I'm still getting used to this version of myself. We have time, he assured me, leaning down to kiss me softly. I'm not going anywhere. Walking into Jason and Sophia's wedding 6 months later, I felt a profound sense of fullness. The ceremony was being held in the botanical gardens where Sophia's parents had married 30 years earlier. A detail that had made me tear up when Jason shared it. There was something beautiful about honoring continuity even as we all embraced change. David walked beside me, handsome in his dark suit, his hand a warm presence at the small of my back. We'd been seeing each other exclusively for several months now, spending quiet evenings cooking together, attending his faculty events, enjoying leisurely weekend mornings with coffee and conversation. It was a different kind of relationship than I'd ever experienced, equal, mutually supportive, without the subtle power imbalances that had defined my marriage. We found our seats in the front row, reserved for immediate family. Across the aisle, Richard sat with his sister and her husband. He nodded politely in our direction, and I returned the gesture with a small smile. When Jason appeared at the altar, handsome and nervous in his tuxedo, my heart swelled with pride and love. Emma stood on the bride's side as Sophia's maid of honor, the two women having formed a close bond over the past year. The ceremony was beautiful, personal without being overly sentimental. When the minister invited the parents to stand for a blessing of the couple, Richard and I rose together, separated by an aisle but united in our love for our son. In that moment I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude, not for what we had been, but for what we had created together despite our eventual failings. At the reception I danced with Jason, my heart full as he whispered, "Thank you for showing me what strength looks like, Mom. I hope Sophia and I have a marriage as strong as you are." I danced with David, comfortable in his gentle embrace, appreciating the way he held me with respect rather than possession. And yes, I even danced with Richard, one brief, polite dance that acknowledged our shared history and our shared future as parents and eventually, perhaps, grandparents. "You seem happy," he said as we moved carefully around the dance floor, maintaining a respectable distance between us. "I am," I confirmed. "And you?" "Getting there," he said honestly. "The business is finally finding its footing, and I'm learning to be comfortable in my own company." As the song ended, he stepped back. "Thank you, Laura. Not just for the dance but for everything. For raising our children to be the people they are. For not letting my mistakes poison their relationship with me. For showing me what dignity looks like." I nodded, accepting his words. "We did some things right, Richard. Let's focus on those as we move forward." Later that night, as David and I walked along the venue's moonlit garden path, he stopped and turned to me. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Gracious with your ex-husband, radiant with your children. I found myself watching you more than the bride." I laughed. "I doubt that very much." "It's true," he insisted, taking both my hands in his. "Laura, I know it's only been 8 months, and I know you're still finding your way in this new life of yours. But I want you to know that I'm falling in love with you. No pressure for you to feel the same yet, but I wanted to be honest about where I stand." I looked up at this kind, intelligent man who had come into my life when I least expected it, but perhaps when I most needed to be reminded that connection was still possible, that trust could be rebuilt, that love didn't have to mean losing yourself. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," I admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. "And that terrifies me a little." "I know," he said, pulling me gently into his arms. "We'll take it as slowly as you need." As we stood there under the stars, I thought about the journey of the past 2 years, from devastation to rebuilding, from loss to discovery. I thought about the woman I'd been at 53, believing my life was essentially settled, my identity fixed. And I thought about the woman I was now at 55, stronger, more self-aware, open to possibilities I'd never imagined. Richard had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about what it meant to grow older together. He'd seen it as a decline, a settling, a slow dimming of possibility. In seeking youth through Melissa, he'd been chasing an illusion, not just of physical beauty, but of the false promise that novelty alone could create meaning. What he'd failed to understand, what I myself was only now fully grasping, was that the richest possibilities often come later in life, after we've weathered storms, accumulated wisdom, shed the need for external validation. There was a depth and authenticity to my life now that I wouldn't trade for all the smooth skin and firm bodies of youth. 6 months after Jason's wedding, I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant buzzed to let me know Emma was on the line. "Mom." Her voice sounded strange, tight with excitement or anxiety, I couldn't tell which. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing's wrong," she assured me. "But I needed to tell you something important. I'm pregnant." The words hit me like a physical force, joy and surprise and 1,000 other emotions colliding at once. "Oh, Emma, that's wonderful news. We weren't planning it yet," she admitted. "But Rob and I are thrilled. You're the first person I've told, aside from him." "When are you due?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my calendar to ensure I could be in Chicago when my grandchild arrived. Late October. And Mom? We want you to come stay with us for a few weeks after the baby comes. I'm going to need your help. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, tears of happiness streaming down my face. A grandmother. I was going to be a grandmother. The cycle continuing, life moving forward in its beautiful, unstoppable way. That evening, I shared the news with David over dinner at his place. He'd been cooking more often lately, discovering a talent for it that delighted us both. "That's wonderful," he exclaimed, raising his glass in toast. "To Emma and Rob, and to Grandma Laura." "Grandma Laura," I repeated, testing the sound of it. "I can't quite believe it." David smiled, that gentle smile I'd come to cherish. "You're going to be an amazing grandmother. Those lucky children will have the benefit of your wisdom, your strength, your capacity for love." "Children, plural?" I laughed. "Let's start with one." He took my hand across the table. "Laura, I've been wanting to ask you something." My heart skipped a beat. We'd been dating exclusively for over a year now, spending more nights together than apart, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. But we'd both been careful not to push too far too fast. "I'm not proposing marriage," he clarified quickly, reading my expression. "Not that I'm ruling it out for the future, but that's not what this is about." "Okay," I said, curious now. "What is it?" "I've been offered a sabbatical next year. A chance to write the book I've been researching. I'd need to spend several months in London, accessing archives there." He squeezed my hand. "I'd like you to consider coming with me, at least for part of the time. We could get a flat in Bloomsbury, near the British Library. You could work remotely for a while, fly back for important meetings. We could have an adventure together." The old Laura, the one who had defined herself primarily as wife and mother, would have immediately catalogued all the reasons why this was impossible, irresponsible, selfish. But the woman I'd become over these past 2 years saw possibility instead of obstacles. "I'd need to work out the logistics," I said thoughtfully, "especially with Emma's baby coming. But, yes, I'd love to have that adventure with you." His face lit up with joy, and in that moment, I saw our potential future stretching before us. Not a replacement for what I'd had with Richard, but something entirely new. Something built on the foundation of who I was now, not who I'd been at 20. The following weekend, I had brunch with Jason and Sophia, who were full of excitement about Emma's pregnancy and their own plans to start trying for a baby soon. "So the Thompson dynasty continues," Jason joked. "You know, Dad's already talking about college funds and baseball mitts?" I smiled, unsurprised. For all his flaws as a husband, Richard had always been an enthusiastic father. "That sounds like him." "It's been good to see him finding his feet again," Jason added carefully. "His business is finally taking off and he seems, I don't know, more grounded? Less focused on appearances." "I'm glad to hear it," I said sincerely. "He asked about you, you know, whether you and David were serious." I raised an eyebrow. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that you seem happy, and that's all that matters." Sophia, always perceptive, changed the subject. "Have you told them about London yet?" Jason looked surprised. "London? What about London?" I explained David's sabbatical and our tentative plans. Instead of the concern I might have expected, Jason's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Mom, that's fantastic. You should absolutely do it. When was the last time you lived abroad? Or even traveled just for pleasure? Not for business or family obligations?" "Never," I admitted. "Your father and I talked about a European trip for our 25th anniversary, but we ended up in Hawaii instead because it was more convenient with his schedule." "Then you're long overdue," Sophia declared. "And don't worry about Emma's baby, we'll all pitch in while you're away. You've spent decades taking care of everyone else. It's your turn for an adventure." As I drove home afterward, I reflected on how much had changed, not just in my circumstances, but in my children's perception of me. They no longer saw me as simply Mom, the reliable support system whose needs came last. They saw me as a woman with desires, ambitions, a right to pursue my own happiness. That shift, perhaps more than anything else, confirmed that I'd done something right in the midst of all the pain and upheaval. I'd modeled for my children what it meant to value yourself, to refuse to settle, to build a life that reflected your true worth. 2 years to the day after I'd confronted Richard about his affair, I found myself standing on the cliffs of Dover, the wind whipping my hair, David's arm around my waist. We'd been in England for 3 weeks, dividing our time between his research in London and weekend explorations of the countryside. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noticing my contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how unpredictable life is," I said. 2 years ago today my 30-year marriage imploded. I thought my life was essentially over, that whatever came next would just be a diminished epilogue to the real story. David pulled me closer. "And now I understand that there are multiple chapters, each with its own significance. What happened with Richard wasn't the end of my story. It was just the end of one chapter." He kissed my temples softly. "I'm grateful to be part of the current chapter." "So am I," I said, turning in his arms to face him. "More than I can express." Later that evening, as we sat in a cozy pub near our rented cottage, my phone rang with a video call from Emma. "Mom, can you see me? Can you hear me?" She was practically bouncing with excitement. "I can see and hear you perfectly," I assured her. "What's going on? Is everything okay with the baby?" "Everything's perfect," she beamed. "We had the anatomy scan today. Do you want to know what you're having?" "Of course. A granddaughter. It's a girl." Joy washed over me in a wave. "Oh, Emma, that's wonderful. We're going to name her Laura Jane," she continued, tears shining in her eyes. "After you and Rob's mother. If that's okay." I couldn't speak for a moment, overcome with emotion. "I'd be honored," I finally managed. "So deeply honored." After we hung up, David raised his pint glass. "To Laura Jane," he toasted. "Named after the strongest woman her mother knows." "Stop it," I protested, wiping away tears. "You'll make me cry again." "It's true," he insisted. "You know, when we first met at that charity dinner last year, I was impressed by your poise, your intelligence. But as I've gotten to know you, what's amazed me most is your resilience. Your capacity to take something painful and transform it into growth." I thought about his words as we walked hand in hand back to our cottage that night. Resilience. It wasn't a quality I would have assigned to myself 3 years ago. I'd always seen myself as the steady one, the reliable one, but not particularly strong or courageous. Yet here I was, running a successful business, traveling abroad with a man who respected and valued me, preparing to welcome a granddaughter named in my honor. All because I'd finally recognized my own worth. Finally understood that I deserved more than to be discarded for a younger model after decades of partnership. In my darkest moments after discovering Richard's betrayal, I'd felt ancient, washed up, irrelevant, past my prime. But the truth was quite the opposite. At 55, I wasn't too old for love, for adventure, for reinvention. I was exactly the right age, seasoned by experience, unburdened by the insecurities of youth, confident in my own skin in a way I'd never been at 20 or 30 or even 40. 6 weeks later, I was back in the States, balancing my time between the business and helping Emma prepare for her daughter's arrival. David had stayed in London to complete his research, but we spoke daily, our connection undiminished by distance. One afternoon, as I was leaving a client meeting downtown, I quite literally ran into Richard on the sidewalk outside the building. "Laura," he exclaimed, steadying me by the elbows. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." "Neither was I," I admitted, taking a step back. "How are you, Richard?" "Good, actually. Really good." He did look well, healthier than the last time I'd seen him, less haunted. "The business is finally thriving. We just landed the Harrington account." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's a significant client." He nodded. "I learned from the best." After a brief hesitation, he asked, "How about you? Jason mentioned you've been in London." "I have. David's on sabbatical there. I've been splitting my time between continents." "That sounds wonderful," he said, and to my surprise, he seemed genuinely pleased for me. "And Emma's baby, it's a girl, right? Named after you?" "Yes," I smiled. "Laura Jane. Due in about 8 weeks. She'll be beautiful and brilliant, just like her grandmother and mother." Richard's expression grew more serious. "Laura, I know this might sound strange, but I'm really happy for you. for everything you've built these past 2 years. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by his sincerity. That means something coming from you. He glanced at his watch. I should let you go. I'm sure you're busy. But it was good to see you. You too, Richard. As he turned to leave, he paused. I read about Thompson Financial in the Business Journal last week, the expansion into sustainable investing, the new client portal. Impressive innovations. Thank you. It's been a good year. You know, he said thoughtfully. In a strange way, you're exactly where you were always meant to be. I just got in the way for 30 years. Before I could respond to this unexpected assessment, he smiled once more and continued on his way. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching him disappear into the crowd. There was no anger left, no bitterness. Just a quiet acknowledgement that sometimes endings, painful as they may be, are necessary for new beginnings. My granddaughter Laura Jane Matthews was born on a crisp October morning. 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfect new life. Holding her for the first time, I felt a circle completing, a new generation beginning, a future stretching forward full of possibilities I would witness but not control. She has your eyes, Emma whispered as we gazed down at the sleeping infant. Poor child. I joked, but my heart swelled with pride and love. David flew in from London the next day, laden with gifts for the baby and an unmistakable sparkle in his eye when he looked at me with a newborn in my arms. Grandmother suits you, he said as we walked through the hospital parking lot that evening, having left Emma and Rob to bond with their daughter. Does it? I laughed. I feel exactly the same, just with an extra title. That's what I mean, he explained. You wear all your roles so beautifully, businesswoman, mother, partner and now grandmother, without being defined or limited by any one of them. As we reached the car, he stopped and turned to face me. Which brings me to something I've been thinking about for a while now. My heart quickened as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. David. Before you say anything, he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by tiny diamonds. This isn't about replacing what you had or starting over. It's about moving forward together. He took my hand. Laura Thompson, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. These past 18 months with you have shown me what true partnership looks like. Equal, respectful, joyful. I love how you've built yourself anew after heartbreak. How you value your independence while still opening your heart to connection. I don't want to change any of that. I just want to be by your side for whatever comes next. Tears filled my eyes as he continued. This isn't a traditional proposal because we're not traditional people at this stage of our lives. I'm not asking you to give up your name, your home, your autonomy. I'm simply asking if you'd consider making our partnership official, in whatever way feels right to you. I looked at the man before me. This kind, brilliant, supportive man who had come into my life when I least expected it, but perhaps when I most needed to be reminded that second acts could be even more authentic than first ones. Yes, I said simply. Yes, I would like that very much. The joy on his face matched the fullness in my heart as he slipped the ring onto my finger. Not a replacement for the wedding band I'd worn for 30 years, but something new and beautiful in its own right. That night, I sat on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the long winding path that had led me here, from the young bride I'd been at 23 to the confident, self-possessed woman I was at 56. I thought about Richard, about the pain of his betrayal but also the strange gift hidden within it. The push I'd needed to discover my own strength, my own value beyond the roles of wife and mother. I thought about Emma and tiny Laura Jane, about Jason and Sophia and their future children. About the legacy I was creating not just through business success or material possessions, but through modeling resilience and self-respect. And I thought about David, about the unexpected joy of finding love again in middle age. A different kind of love, more equal and clear-eyed than what I'd known before. The woman Richard rejected for being too old had found her power, her purpose, her place in the world. Not despite her age, but because of it, because of the wisdom earned through experiences both beautiful and brutal, because of the perspective that comes only with time and reflection. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Asterisk checked on Emma and the baby, both sleeping peacefully. Rob asked me to tell you they're thinking of coming to London with us this summer. Said his daughter needs to see the world early. I'm in the hotel bar if you'd like to come down and celebrate properly. Asterisk. I smiled and typed back. Asterisk on my way. And yes to London. Yes to all of it. Asterisk. As I stood to go downstairs, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Silvery hair gleaming in the moonlight, laugh lines framing eyes that held both joy and hard-won wisdom. I looked exactly my age, and for the first time in my life, that fact filled me with nothing but pride. Richard had been right about one thing. Our marriage had reached its natural conclusion. What he hadn't understood was that endings aren't failures when they lead to growth, when they open doors to authenticity, when they reveal strengths previously hidden. The company he'd thought was his? It was thriving under my leadership. The wife he'd discarded as too old? She was embarking on new adventures with a man who valued her experience rather than resenting it. The life he'd walked away from? It had transformed into something richer than either of us could have imagined. As I rode the elevator down to meet David, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the pain or the betrayal, but for the woman I'd become in their aftermath. A woman who finally understood that her value had never been in youth or beauty or accommodation, but in courage, resilience, and the willingness to begin again. My 30-year marriage had ended because my ex-husband said I was too old and he preferred younger women. But as it turned out, that ending was just the beginning of the most authentic chapter of my life. A chapter written entirely in my own voice, on my own terms, in the fullness of my hard-won wisdom. And there was nothing more beautiful or powerful than that.